Okay. So let me just grab. Okay, so here's the question: Can social movement power really transform history and our time? And if so, how? And then we look at the model, and the model is just those ideas that you start with purpose, and then you think about power, and then you think about people, and then you develop processes to develop people as leaders. And then you build out. So the process is where the work's actually happening. What you're doing is right at the center of those circles. The outside of the circle of purpose is the boundary. You don't do anything that violates the boundary. That if it's not transformative, it's not universal, if it's not about sharing power and your core transformative values, it's out of bounds. But anything that's within bounds you can do. And then you go to the center of your circle and you expand it. So you think what processes are necessary in order to develop people's capacity as leaders, and then as leaders to work together, cooperation, reflection, and resources, and then you have power, and then you build your power all the way out to your purpose. And so then there's this question of being a social movement. And I think that I've been thinking a lot about social movements in a new way, and I think part of it is because just about 2 months ago, I was you to somebody from somewhere else, and then was in Toronto, and he had been involved, and he was Quebecois, so he was from Quebec, and he'd been a student leader in Quebec, and had been involved a few years ago in developing the structures that were put in place intentionally to see the social movement that's taking place in Quebec now. And so he was really explicit in describing a couple of the things that had happened at a structural level. One was to create an alternative to top-down, sort of control-based student unions. And for that alternative to be based on this sharing of power, bottom-up sort of process of developing leaders and developing the process. And so now instead of having like sort of a hierarchy and 12 people that represent all the students in the province, each community within each school of these different schools were forming essentially their own general assemblies. And so this process broadened the participation and required people to be involved. That was one step. The next step they did was they said that we have to have a way to communicate with people about what we're talking about in concrete ways. And that's the point of entry. So we're going to talk with students about access to education, affordability. And we're going to then make that into something bigger by talking about how access to education and affordability connects with equality and democracy. And then they went about the process of sort of implementing this. And in the first step, it would fail. So a few years back, it failed. And then the process continued, and there was more development, and now we are witnessing in North America, where we live, one of the largest youth-led movements in North America in decades. And this was intentionally thought through and structured by people who went through a similar process of asking, how much power do we have now? How do we build the power out? And what's the purpose of this power? And I think what I thought though when I was listening to him say this, is I took the ideas and he sort of, outlined it. And I said, well, a lot of these ideas are really similar to the same things that we're doing in British Columbia with early childhood educators and childcare workers. We're building new structures so that people can be directly involved in decision making. We're increasing involvement, and we're talking about something that involves everyone, which is essentially how do we make sure all generations are included and all generations are cared for. And then we're doing it in concrete demands, which is the next step, right? So we're saying equitable wage for early childhood educators at UBC is one step, and then a future step will be access to public universal childcare for everyone in the community. And so, and then it hit me what we were actually seeing with the power of, say, Quebec, is that if you were using these techniques, if you were planting seeds, thinking transformative values, going through that seemingly endless task of going to general assemblies or to dialogues or to community groups or to building community through making meals together or singing together or passing out flyers and involving people in decision making. Well, if you were doing that and you weren't sure if it could work, well, now you know, because that's what is happening in Quebec. And we're seeing 250,000 people once a month be mobilized. And people in Quebec are human beings just like us, and they live in the North American economic structure, just like we do. So we may not speak French like they do, but we are connected with them in more ways than we as English North Americans may think of ourselves. Or folks, I'm born in the United States. I lived in the United States until 5 years ago, and Quebec seems pretty foreign, pretty different from the US. But having lived in Canada, it's not as different as it seems, in the sense that it is in economic structure. Quebec against the same challenges people in the United States and the rest of Canada are. It is possible. These ideas do work. And I think that that's one of the reasons why when social movements take off, they can take off in so many places all at once. Because people that were busy working on it look and see an example and say, wow, it can work. And so out of that process gets back to, though, in British Columbia, there's not going to be what's happening in Quebec. Not this year. It's not going to happen. Well, it could happen. I don't want to say it can't happen, but it could happen. But it likely won't happen because the work to prepare for it hasn't happened yet. And yet, there are people now all across British Columbia having conversations about what can we learn from Quebec? What can we start doing now so that in 10 years, what's happening in Quebec can happen here? And 10 years is a blip in time in history. It's not that, it may seem like a long time to us, like as we go about planning our organization, but it's a blip in time. The Liberation Learning Project is working through a 20-year vision. And we'd like to see our vision happen within the next 20 years. And so what I want to end on is what we mean in very explicit terms by the values that are the core of our work in the Liberation Learning Project, because these values and these concepts are core to what the outcomes will be. So if you look on the sheet that's passed out on the top part of it, it talks about the three values, which are unconditional respect, universal dignity, and shared responsibility. And I think that embedded within these values are these concepts of power. Now, for Liberation Learning Project, when we talk about power and shared responsibility, we talk about sharing power with young people. That the first step of this is to transform the relationship of child care workers, which includes all child workers, so unpaid care workers are moms and dads and grandparents and neighbors. Most child care work is unpaid, unsupported, and unrecognized. And then also underpaid, so nannies, early childhood educators, family care providers. And what we're talking about is first changing our relationship to power ourselves, recognizing our own power. And then with our newfound recognition of our power, sharing that power with young people so that every person at any age is respected. And so what we mean by respect, and this comes from the Nisga'a Nation, which is a First Nation or a native community in northern British Columbia, which is that respect is the recognition of another person's human power. To me, this is a profound definition of respect. I had used the word respect for nearly a decade without really understanding what it meant. And I always knew I didn't quite understand it. I just had an intuitive sense until I came across this definition. Because when it becomes about the recognition of another person's human power, then when we demand respect, we demand that people actually recognize our power. And our power is enormous. It's way less than most of us realize. And when someone recognizes our power, then that is in itself transformative. And respect is always relational. And so it's one person's power to another person's power is what the recognition is. And this is why dialogue is so important in social movement organizing, because dialogue is the embodiment of respect. It's when we recognize each person's power to transform ourselves by listening actively to each other. And then dignity is that power. So if respect is the recognition essentially of human dignity, and dignity is absolute human power, and it's equal, ungiven, and it can't be taken from you. And so in a sense, when we recognize power, we recognize their dignity. Dignity is something that's within us. When I talk about dignity with 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who I work with, how we define dignity is with a mirror. And we project the mirror back, and we say that the mirror is reflecting you, and you are dignity. And then dignity is equal, and it can't be taken from you. And then shared responsibility. What shared responsibility really is, it's about how we use power. And shared responsibility is the respectful use of human power to expand universal dignity. Now, why I share this is because if we're going to build social movements that answer the question of how do we make sure that the power we're building is used for its intended purpose, we need to be really explicit about what we intend to achieve. The transformation of childcare in British Columbia, or the abolition of poverty in the world, which is what the Poor People's Movement to End Poverty, which is what United Workers was focused on. But the transformation of childcare in British Columbia is about, very explicitly, this meaning of respect, this meaning of dignity, and this meaning of sharing of power. And then for the organization to ask itself at every moment, at every aspect, of every part of its work, is it within bounds of that purpose? Does it reflect that purpose? And then we go about the process of building power. But I just want to quickly conclude and just go back to this idea that human power is social power, and so we build power by working together. We work together by having honest conversations with each other, and by working together, by being reflective and creative and critical in our work. And if we want to, look back at the quote by Paulo Freire, I think that in that he actually defines everything which is essential to keep in mind for social movement work. And then we need to be comfortable with the fact that it's actually quite simple, that we're going to transform childcare in British Columbia by having thousands of dinners together and thousands of conversations with each other. Because like one of the people that I work with said in our founding meeting, she said, because we are the childcare workers, childcare could be transformed tomorrow if we just all changed what we did when we work with children. That's what it takes. Everything that happens in the world everything happens in the human world, in the social world, happens because of what human beings do. So when human beings are transformed and we change what we do, then the change happens. We stop destroying our planet, we stop killing one another, we stop treating each other as slaves, we stop living transactional, empty, individualistic lives. The transformation happens within us, the power is within us. At the middle of that big circle is the process, and the process happens within people. And so it is deceptively simple and repeated: dialogue, meal, celebration, community, and we just live it out. And like I really like the idea of it's planting seeds, but it's not just planting seeds, it's cultivating seeds. Social movement work is a constant process of renewal and rejuvenation. It's not some endpoint. It's not some magic moment where it all becomes better. And when we have more people engaged in social movement organizing, more people in rejuvenating and building communities, is when we see the change that we want to see. So I want to end on that. I want to say thanks a lot for participating in this workshop. This has been an interesting process for me because I've never done one like this. And so if we just want to maybe conclude with some folks that are there that have any final reflections, and then I'll let you go. Hopefully it's bedtime. If anyone wants to conclude before you all go on to your next thing, that would be great.
Nobody has questions?
I was going to add earlier that this is Scott, and that one of the questions the question Charlie asked about when it's not working out, one thing came to mind for me was our definition when we do our trainings of power is information plus money plus people, and you need to have two of the three before you need to have two before you can get the third. So you always find if you think of a situation where there's like really I'm gonna put this down, it's awkward, when there's really maybe there are a few people, there's three people in a high-rise in New York City, and they have an idea of what they'd like to do to fix a problem, and they can use their money to take out ads to put out information, and then get people. So they can use their money and then information to get their third ingredient, have the power to do what they want to do. If you have like a group of students at a university, they're typically large bodies of people, lots of access to people, and often because they're students, they're they have lots of access to information. So people with a lot of information can use those two things to start getting together, and if not having potluck dinners at thousands of potluck dinners, then also passing the hat and collecting money and building your resources part that Tom was talking about. And if you're just you also see corporations and the way they do things, right? You'll see that the way they use the three ingredients, they'll use lots of people in their employment. So Walmart's the largest employer, for example, or something like that, and they have lots and lots of money, right? So they can use their lots of money and their lots of people, put those together, get the information they want, and put it out there. A lot of times when we're doing like the get money out of politics work, you'll find people who rightly assert that even if that were to happen, huge employers could move huge numbers of people with lots of money towards whatever informational goal they had. So I think like those three have really helped us and my work and the organizations I've worked with, just understanding that. I think you've broken those ingredients down into more specific terms. I think you've defined resources and you've defined information in different ways, but maybe that's another way to look at it too, is that... Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think it's an interesting way to look at it. One thing, when I think of power and money, I actually think money is just quantified power. And anytime you quantify something, you reduce all the qualities to a number. And so money is, monetization is through money. And so that we can, essentially, it makes it possible for us to measure power really easily, because you can say there's 1 million units of power, and then that 1 million units can transfer into X number of minutes on TV or X number of workers. The thing is, though, as soon as power is monetized or quantified, then it becomes transactional always. And so money's useful. It's a really useful resource. And so what's useful about what you just described is the way to think of how money can be useful. But it becomes transactional. And this is important to point out, because if our purpose is transformative, it doesn't mean that we can't use transactional tools like within that purpose. But it does change the quality of what we're working with. And so I think we have to be really careful when we think of, say, like the analogy to corporations. Well, what corporations do is that they control things in order to get resources from people. And that's really different than essentially thinking of power as coming from within people. And it's essentially, power is dignity. It's an expression of human dignity. And we expand that power by people working with each other. And the balance, this sort of how we use money in building social movements is really complicated. But I find that the less monetization that takes place at the point of transformation, that the more powerful the transformation.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's the point you're making at all. But I just want to point that out, because to me, money is simply an expression of power once it's been quantified.
Yeah, well, the other way that equation goes is just plugging in resources instead of money, as information plus resources plus people. I agree with you. I think for me, it's not necessarily about all those things, but what happens when organizations, for example, aren't well resourced and they're finding themselves hitting a wall over and over again, and how do their information as one part of the equation plus their numbers play a role, and how are those variables transformed so that they can get the third ingredient and have the capacity to move forward beyond those walls.
Yeah, and what's great about this conversation, I wish I could actually see who I'm talking with, but because, okay.
You're sitting here.
Okay. It's because here we are having a dialogue, so it's great because so I understand what you're saying. I think it's a really useful tool, but you're pointing out some areas where I don't think I was very clear with you based on what you're saying.
Yeah.
And so my sense of saying work, cooperation, resources, and reflection. Resources, this is includes money, okay, but it's also just an acknowledgement that our power is not just like who we are as human beings, but also in relationship to the environment, to the world that we're part of. So resources to me is trees and water and air, and then we can turn resources into commodities, but we can also turn people into commodities. And so my concern is that as soon as we like put in a definition of power, money itself, as opposed to just money being a form of power, is that we move toward commodification. And so, but that doesn't negate your point, which is that it's really helpful to think of money as a kind of resource that we have that allows us to mobilize our ideas or to connect with people. So I'm not arguing with your point, I just want to be really clear that when I say resources, what I basically mean is like the planet. Because I used to think, very foolishly, that power was just human potential.
Yeah, sure.
I realized, it's actually more than that. We need the earth, the sun, to make food for us, or we have the power to be alive for about a week.
Right, yeah, fair enough. I think Dr. King and Marshall Gans and a bunch of others have like a whole list of like moral resources versus natural resources versus material resources. So I can understand why you want to clarify that.
Yeah, but this exchange, and your name is Scott, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, this exchange we're having right now is why I refuse to ever do a presentation this way, and why I said no PowerPoint, because if I'm going to be talking, I hope that I can actually have some way to actually connect. So what you just shared with me has transformed me. I'm thinking about what I said and also about my relationship with money, which I think about a lot, because I need to rethink monetize power, because it's an Achilles heel in my work. You probably didn't intend for that because you didn't know that about me. And now we're having a conversation, but I also want you to think about Dr. King and moral resources as the idea that you just said is influencing your work, and I think it can influence in ways that are really profound, that may be actually pulling it away from transformative purposes. So, and that's why dialogue is so important.
Yeah.
So you said something about your Achilles heel. I was breaking up when you were saying that. Could you reiterate? My
Achilles heel is I'm so focused on transformative power, and so cautious around any time it is transactional that I haven't done a very good job of like having a monetary base to work from. And money is really helpful. I'm using money right now to do something that's just like so much easier with money. It's like, and so so we're really thinking, and I'm really thinking about how I think of monetized power and its limitations and leading towards transactional power, because I think that not using money and not sort of sharing money and creating accumulations of money is a real limitation in my work. So that's what I just meant. And and this is the power of dialogue, is that we're
repeat your last sentence.
So, we're changing. We're transformed by this crazy technology. It gets back to my first comment that we don't want to alienate ourselves because everything that we do becomes transactional. And so this technology has converted me into a bunch of numbers, and I'm really separated. Are all separated from me, and so we just want to think about those things in big, complex ways, which you're going to be able to do much better over the course of this week than I will, because I won't. Well, I'll do it in my other work. But so are there any other comments? It's hard to end something where I don't see your faces, but I'm guessing by the time that people are tired and ready to go to bed.
Yeah, good.
I want to say thank you. It's been so nice to be a part of tonight, and just keep up the amazing work. One thing we tend to do is to underestimate our power, your power, the power of people, the people like you in this room right now and what you're doing to make history. And it's happening. We're seeing it all across the world. It's an extraordinary time to be in social movement organizing, and the work that you're doing now and the work you'll do over these next days makes a huge difference in people's lives. And I think that we need to recognize that we do so much with so little because we are so committed and so smart and so hardworking. And I'm blessed to have even this digital moment with you all. So thank you for this, and thanks for all the amazing things that you do to make the world that I live in a better place. Thank you.
Woo! Thank you. All right, thank you, Kertes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, folks are still in the room. Thank you for joining us while we set up on Sunday. Tomorrow is going to be our big day to really get things going. So if you want to wake up for breakfast at 8 a.m., you'll hear the orca horns across camp. And we'll have some nice grub in the morning, and then we'll start off with some discussions about cultural competency. Our trainers from Chicago are going to be leading that, and it'll be pretty awesome. Tomorrow we have a little more opportunity to connect. We'll start off actually with an opening circle, and maybe do some yoga or something like that, whatever folks are feeling. And then we'll go into a discussion on cultural competency and really focus on strategy and theme, or in theory tomorrow. It's going to, so opening circle will be out on the lawn there right after breakfast at 9 a.m. Yeah. And does anyone have a penchant for starting fires? Campfire? Would you like to? Yeah. I don't know if anyone has some songs they'd like to break out with, or just want to share some stories by the fire. But if you want to get
fire,
yeah, let's start the fire.
Get to the songs.
Yeah.
Where are you with that?
The fire's right out there, right outside the building there.
I need a layer.
Headlamp? Sure, we can definitely do that.
Yeah, okay, cool.
Let me go grab my headlamp.